The morning my husband left me to die in a hurricane, I found three things hidden in his golf bag. A burner phone filled with messages to another woman. A secret offshore account holding $47 million. And a life insurance policy on my life, worth $5 million, taken out exactly 1 month before the storm. He did not just abandon me, he was betting on my death. I was 8 months pregnant, alone, trapped on a barrier island with a Category 2 hurricane bearing down. No cell service.
It's
no
the
way
transfer
out.
records. I told you shouldn't have done
That
it.
told me my baby was coming, whether I was ready or not. My husband was 6,000 miles away in Paris, posting champagne selfies while I gave birth on our living room floor. He thought I would die quietly. He thought I would disappear like all his other victims. He thought wrong. Because I was not just some trophy wife from Ohio. I was a forensic accountant who knew exactly how to follow money. And what I found in his files would bring down an entire empire. This is the story of how I survived the storm, exposed a decade of crimes, and made one of the most powerful families in Florida watch everything they built crumble to dust. But I have to warn you, this story has twists you will never see coming. Betrayals from people I trusted, moments so dark I almost did not survive them, and an ending that shocked everyone, including me. If you have ever felt trapped in a situation that seemed impossible, if you have ever been underestimated by people who thought they were better than you, if you have ever wondered what you would do if you had nothing left to lose, this story is for you. Stay with me until the end. I promise it will be worth it. The morning my husband left me to die in a hurricane, I found three things: a burner phone hidden in his golf bag, an offshore account holding $47 million, and the strength I had buried so deep inside myself that I had forgotten it even existed. My name is Emma Lawson, not Emma Thornton, though that is what they made me call myself for 2 miserable years. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, the daughter of a factory worker who taught me how to change a tire and throw a punch before I turned 12. My mother worked double shifts as a hotel housekeeper until the work finally killed her when I was 16 years old. After she died, I raised my younger brother alone while finishing high school, then put myself through college, then earned my certification as a forensic accountant at one of the biggest firms in the country. I was not some helpless princess waiting to be rescued. I was a survivor, but somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I let a charming man with a trust fund convince me that my dreams were too small, that my ambitions were beneath someone of his status, that love meant shrinking myself so he could feel bigger. That morning in Miami, with hurricane sirens wailing outside and my 8-month pregnant belly tight with early contractions, I finally remembered who I really was. The sky had turned an ugly purple color, bruised and swollen with the approaching storm. I stood in the marble foyer of the Thornton estate, my bare feet cold against Italian tile that cost more than my entire yearly salary had been back when I was allowed to work. My hands pressed against my stomach where my daughter kicked and turned, completely unaware of the abandonment happening above us. "Please," I begged. "Richard, please do not leave me here alone." Dr. Martinez said the baby could come any time now. The hurricane watch just turned into a warning. "Please." My husband adjusted his $80,000 watch and sighed like I was a particularly tiresome child. His mother, Victoria, stood beside him in head-to-toe designer clothing, her lips pursed in that expression of permanent distaste she reserved especially for me. "Darling, you are being hysterical," Marcus said. His voice dripped with condescension. "We have had this Paris trip planned for 6 months. The Fashion Week tickets alone cost $50,000. You have the entire staff here. You will be perfectly fine." "The staff left yesterday," I whispered. Tears were already burning in my eyes. "Everyone evacuated except Rosa and James. The weather service told all personnel to leave the barrier islands." Marcus did not even hear me. He was looking at his phone, smiling at something on the screen, his thumbs moving as he typed a message to someone who made him much happier than I ever could. His sister Caroline laughed. It was a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the howling wind outside. "Oh my God, she is going to cry again." "Marcus, I told you that marrying a nurse from Chicago was a mistake. They are so dramatic about everything." I had never been a nurse. I had been a forensic accountant, but the Thorntons had never bothered to learn anything real about me. Victoria stepped forward, her perfume expensive and suffocating. "Emma, dear, Women have been having babies for thousands of years. My grandmother had 5 children on a farm with no electricity and never made such a fuss. Perhaps if you came from better stock, you would handle these situations with more grace. The words landed like slaps across my face. I had heard variations of them for the entire 2 years of my marriage. You are not refined enough. You do not understand our world. Why can you not be more like the women in our circle? I had met Marcus at a charity gala in Chicago back when I still believed in fairy tales. He had been charming that night, attentive in a way that made me feel seen for the first time in years. He talked about his passion for healthcare reform, his desire to use his family wealth for good. He pursued me relentlessly, sending flowers to my office, taking me to intimate dinners where he asked about my work, and seemed genuinely fascinated by my stories about uncovering financial fraud. The wedding was at their Cape Cod estate. 300 guests, everyone who mattered in their social world. My mother had been dead for years by then, but my few friends from work came. They clustered together awkwardly, clearly unwelcome among the country club elite who looked at them like they were staff who had wandered into the wrong room. The mask slipped on our honeymoon. Marcus grew impatient with my questions, dismissive of my opinions. By the time we returned to Miami, he was barely home, always flying somewhere for business. When I suggested returning to my accounting career part-time, he had been horrified. "Thornton wives do not work," he said flatly. "It makes me look like I cannot provide for my family. You will focus on charity committees and hosting dinners. That is your job now." Pregnancy made everything worse. Marcus found my changing body repulsive. He made comments about how I had let myself go. He compared me unfavorably to his trim, elegant mother, who had apparently never gained a single pound during any of her pregnancies. The family treated me like an incubator, discussing the baby's future schooling and social connections while ignoring my presence entirely. And now, with a Category 2 hurricane bearing down on Miami's coast, they were leaving me. "I will be back in 10 days, Marcus said. He was already moving toward the helipad on the roof where their private helicopter waited. "Try not to be a complete mess while I am gone. And for God's sake, do not post anything on social media about being alone. It is embarrassing." I watched them board the helicopter, watched it rise into the darkening sky and angle toward the airport where their private jet was fueled and ready. Through the rain-streaked windows, I could see Victoria laughing at something Caroline said. Marcus was already back on his phone, probably texting whoever had made him smile earlier. I knew about her, the mistress, a 23-year-old woman he kept in an apartment in Paris. I had found the credit card statements months ago, the jewelry purchases and lingerie and rent payments for a place I had never seen. I had not said anything. I had been too afraid, too beaten down, too convinced that I deserved whatever crumbs of affection he occasionally threw my way. Now, alone in this $12 million prison that passed for a home, I felt the first real contraction ripple through my body. I gasped and gripped the window frame as pain radiated from my lower back around to my swollen belly. The baby pressed down hard, insistent, ready to enter a world that was not ready for her. "No," I whispered to my stomach. "Not yet, sweetheart. Please, not yet." But my body had other plans. Another contraction followed 8 minutes later, stronger than the first. I fumbled for my phone and pulled up the contraction timer app, my hands shaking so badly I could barely tap the screen. Outside, palm trees bent nearly horizontal in the wind. Rain began to pelt the windows in sheets so thick I could not see the ocean anymore. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the crack of something large breaking apart. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Emergency generators hummed to life after a terrifying moment of total darkness, bathing the mansion in eerie yellow backup lighting that made everything look like a scene from a horror movie. I sank onto the white leather sofa, breathing through another contraction, alone and terrified in a house that had never felt like home. My phone showed no signal. The cell towers must have been overloaded or damaged already. The landlines were dead when I checked them. The causeways connecting our barrier island to the mainland would be flooding by now, impassable until the storm passed. I was trapped, in labor, in the middle of a hurricane, abandoned by everyone who should have loved me. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway, and everything changed. Rosa Henderson appeared in the doorway like an answer to a prayer I had not known I was saying. She was the estate housekeeper, a woman of perhaps 55 who had worked for the Thornton family for 20 years. She had kind eyes that saw more than most people realized, and she was the only person in this house who had ever treated me like a human being instead of an inconvenient accessory. "Mrs. Thornton," she said quietly, "the contractions started, did they not?" I could only nod, tears streaming down my face as another wave of pain crashed through my body. The contractions were getting closer together now, and the spotting I had noticed earlier was getting worse. This baby was coming, whether I was ready or not. Rosa crossed the room quickly and knelt beside me. Her presence was somehow steadying in the chaos, like finding solid ground in the middle of an earthquake. "I am not leaving you," she said simply. "We are going to get through this together. I promise you that you are not alone anymore." I did not know why I believed her. This woman was practically a stranger to me, kept at arm's length by Marcus and his family who treated staff like furniture. But something in her voice rang true in a way that my husband's promises never had. "Can you walk?" Rosa asked. "We need to get you somewhere more comfortable. The backup generators might not last through the whole storm." She helped me up the stairs to the master bedroom, moving slowly to accommodate my contractions. James Mitchell met us in the hallway. He was the estate manager, a quiet man of about 36 who had always seemed to fade into the background whenever the Thorntons were around. Former military, I remembered hearing once. He had that calm, competent energy of someone who had seen worse situations than this and survived them all. "I have emergency medical training," James said. His voice was steady despite the wind screaming outside. "My daughter was born premature 6 years ago. I know what to watch for. We are going to get through this." Between contractions, I noticed something strange. Rosa and James exchanged a look that seemed weighted with meaning, like they had been waiting for something and that something was finally happening. "Rosa," I gasped as another wave of pain hit. "What is going on? Why did you both stay?" Rosa was quiet for a moment, arranging pillows behind my back and checking my pulse with practiced efficiency. Then she spoke. "20 years I have worked for this family. 20 years of yes ma'am and no sir and pretending I did not see the cruelty right in front of my face." She paused, her jaw tight with old anger. "5 years ago, the Thorntons bought my daughter's bakery. Sarah had built it from nothing, 20 employees, a real community gathering place. They promised to help her expand. Instead, they stripped it for assets, bankrupted it for a tax write-off, and threw everyone out on the street." I stared at her through the haze of pain. "Rosa, I am so sorry. My daughter lost her business, lost her marriage from the stress, lost 3 years of her life trying to recover." Rosa's voice was flat, but her eyes burned. "I stayed because I needed access. I needed proof. For 5 years, I have been documenting everything, every illegal deal, every bribe, every lie. I have been waiting for someone brave enough to help me use it." Another contraction ripped through me, and I grabbed Rosa's hand so hard I thought I might break her fingers. She did not flinch. When the pain passed, I looked at her with new understanding. "You thought that person would be me." "I hoped," Rosa admitted. "You are smart, Emma, smarter than they ever realized. I looked you up when Marcus first brought you home. Forensic accountant, top of your class, 5 years at one of the biggest accounting firms in the country finding financial fraud." She almost smiled. "They never even Googled you properly. They just saw a pretty girl from Ohio and assumed you were simple." The hurricane howled outside, rattling the windows so hard I thought they might shatter. James was on his phone trying to find a signal, his face grim. "Rosa," I said slowly, "I need you to bring me Marcus's files. All of them, everything from his home office." She raised her eyebrows. "Now, while you are in labor, I manage something like a smile through my exhaustion. This is what I do. I find things that people hide. And if what you are telling me is true, then Marcus has been hiding a lot. My father always told me that if someone needs 2 phones, they are living 2 lives. I used to think he was paranoid. Earlier today, I knocked over Marcus's golf bag and found a burner phone. That is how I know he is living at least one life he does not want me to see." Rosa's expression shifted. "What was on the phone?" "Text from someone named V with photos. She is young, blonde, and Rosa, She is pregnant too. The housekeeper closed her eyes briefly, like she was absorbing a blow she had been expecting for a long time. There is more, is there not? The worst text said, "Do not worry, baby. Once this hurricane takes care of the problem, we will be free. Make sure the staff is gone." Silence fell between us, heavy as the storm clouds outside. "He did not just leave you," Rosa said quietly. "He is hoping you die." I nodded, and somehow saying it out loud made it real in a way it had not been before. My husband wanted me dead. The father of my child had abandoned me in a hurricane and was hoping the storm would kill me so he could be free to start a new life with someone else. "Then let us make sure you survive," Rosa said fiercely. "And let us make sure he pays for every single thing he has done." James appeared in the doorway with an armful of file folders and a laptop. "I could not reach emergency services. The lines are completely overloaded." He set everything down on the bed beside me. "But I found these in his office. And Emma, you need to see what is on this computer." Over the next hour, between contractions that came closer and closer together, I did what I had been trained to do. I followed the money. When you suspect financial fraud, you do not look for the big numbers first. You look for patterns. Criminals hide money in repetition because human beings are creatures of habit. Same amounts on the same dates to the same accounts. The pattern is always the confession. What I found in Marcus's files made my blood run cold. 47 shell companies, 12 documented investors who had been defrauded, 3 businesses deliberately bankrupted for profit, including Rosa's daughter's bakery, $230 million in hidden assets scattered across offshore accounts, and 1 life insurance policy in me for $5 million, taken out exactly 1 month ago. Beneficiary, Marcus Thornton. He was not just hoping I would die in the hurricane. He was planning to profit from it. The hurricane reached its peak intensity just as my labor became impossible to ignore. The power flickered and died completely, leaving us with only battery-powered lanterns in the howling darkness outside. I was fully dilated now. There was no hospital, no doctor, no sterile equipment. Just Rosa and James and a pile of clean towels and the fierce determination to bring my daughter into this world alive. "I need you to listen to me," I told them both, my voice stronger than I felt. "I have delivered babies before. Not as a doctor, but I took emergency medical training in college. I know what is supposed to happen. I am going to talk you through helping me." James nodded, his military training kicking in. He was calm under pressure in a way that steadied my own nerves. "Just tell us what to do." Something shifted inside me then. Not physically, though that was happening too. But mentally, I found the calm place I had discovered when my mother died. The place where I delivered my baby brother's eulogy at 17 years old in front of a church full of people who had written us off as white trash. The place where I survived alone. "I have been in harder situations than this," I said out loud, and saying it made it true. I birthed myself into a new life after my mother died. I can birth my daughter into this one. The next 2 hours were the hardest of my life. Pain like I had never imagined, wave after wave of it, while the hurricane screamed outside like it was trying to tear the house apart. James monitored my vitals with the basic medical supplies he had found in the emergency kit. Rosa held my hand and coached my breathing and told me stories about her daughter's birth to distract me from the agony. At 2:47 in the morning, my daughter entered the world. Her first cry was weak, thready, but it was there. She was so small, barely 5 pounds, born 6 weeks too early in the worst possible conditions. But she was breathing. She was alive. James worked with quiet efficiency, clearing her airways, cutting the cord with sterilized scissors, wrapping her tiny body in clean blankets. Rosa was crying openly, something I had never seen her do in all the time I had known her. "She looks just like you," Rosa said through her tears as she placed my daughter on my chest. "Thank God she has your face and not that horse jaw of her father's." I laughed weakly, the first real laugh I had managed in months. Rosa shrugged. "What? I am being nice." I could have said what I really think of his face. My daughter's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, and I fell in love so completely that everything else in the world seemed to fade away. This tiny, perfect being who had fought so hard to survive, who had entered the world in the middle of chaos and refused to give up. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered. "Hi, my brave girl." We made it. As the storm began to ease outside, my phone finally found a signal. Notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls, text messages, social media alerts, and one post from Marcus that made me want to scream. He had uploaded a photo to Instagram. The Eiffel Tower lit up at night, champagne glasses in the foreground. The caption read, "Perfect evening in the city of lights. Some people know how to live." Posted 40 minutes ago. He knew. He had to know about the hurricane. It was all over the news. He knew I was alone in that house with a Category 2 storm bearing down, and he was posting about champagne in Paris. But that was not the worst part. In the background of the photo, I could see three other people at the table. Victoria, perfectly coiffed as always, Caroline, laughing at something, and a young blonde woman I recognized from the photos on the burner phone. The mistress was with his family. They all knew. They all knew about her, and they had chosen her over me. I looked more closely at the photo, using the zoom feature to examine the background. Marcus had always been careless, leaving important documents lying around, forgetting to lock his phone. And there, on the table behind the champagne glasses, I could see a piece of paper with text on it. I enlarged the image until the words became clear. Certificate of verification. And below that, partial phrases I could barely make out. Proof of death. Insurance claim. They were not just hoping I would die. They were preparing paperwork for after it happened. This was premeditated murder, disguised as an act of God. "Rosa," I said quietly, "look at this." She took the phone, her face going pale as she understood what she was seeing. Then her expression hardened into something fierce and determined. "We need to get off this island," she said, "before they come back, before they realize you survived." But as I looked down at my newborn daughter sleeping peacefully against my chest, I felt something else rising inside me. Not fear anymore, not despair, rage. "I spent 2 years being small so Marcus could feel big," I said slowly. "I shrunk my career and my friendships and my opinions and my entire self to fit into his world. I let them convince me that I was not enough. I held my daughter closer, feeling her tiny heartbeat against mine. I am done being small. They want me dead. Fine. Emma Thornton can die tonight. But Emma Lawson, my father's daughter, she is about to burn their whole world down." I named her Lily. Marcus had hated that name, had wanted something more traditional, more suitable for a Thornton heir. But Marcus was not here, and this was my daughter, and I would call her whatever I wanted. Lily Grace Lawson. That was who she would be, not a Thornton, never a Thornton. By dawn, the hurricane had passed. The roads were flooded, but passable for someone who knew the area well. Rosa's cousin Danny had a boat, and he owed her a favor. We escaped the island before Marcus could return, before anyone could realize that the hurricane had failed to kill me. We disappeared into the chaos of the storm's aftermath. 3 women and a newborn baby, carrying with us enough evidence to destroy an empire. I had no idea then what was waiting for us. No idea how much worse things would get before they got better. No idea that the hardest fight of my life was just beginning. But I knew one thing for certain. I was not going to let them win. Not anymore. Not ever again. The safe house was a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood of Miami, off the books and untraceable. Rosa's cousin Danny owned the building and asked no questions when we showed up at dawn with a newborn baby and wild looks in our eyes. For 2 weeks, I hid there and healed. Lily was tiny but strong, eating well and gaining weight despite her early arrival. I pumped milk around the clock, caught sleep in 2-hour increments, and spent every other waking moment doing what I did best. Following the money. My old college roommate, Denise Carter, was a divorce attorney now, one of the best in Florida for high-asset cases. I called her on the 3rd day using a burner phone Rosa had purchased with cash. "Let me get this straight," Denise said after I explained everything. "He abandoned you in a hurricane. He took out a secret life insurance policy. He has a pregnant mistress. And his whole family is in on it." Yes, there was a long pause. "Girl, this is not a divorce case. This is a Netflix documentary. I am literally booking a flight right now." Denise arrived 2 days later with 3 rolling suitcases full of legal documents and a determination that matched my own. She had always been a fighter, the kind of person who ran toward problems instead of away from them. In college, she had once gotten a professor fired for harassment by organizing every woman he had ever targeted into a unified front. She approached my situation with the same energy. While she worked on the legal strategy, I worked on the financial evidence. Rosa's 5 years of documentation filled in gaps I could not have discovered on my own. Photos of meetings, recorded phone calls, names and dates and dollar amounts that painted a picture of systematic fraud going back more than a decade. James helped too, in his quiet way. He had a friend who worked at the SEC, and anonymously, we began feeding information to the right people. On day 14, I was ready to make my move. I filed for divorce in Miami-Dade County, citing abandonment and fraud. I included just enough evidence to freeze the Thornton accounts, but not so much that Marcus could claim I had obtained it illegally. He was served papers in Paris. I watched his social media melt down from the safety of the apartment, Lily sleeping in a borrowed bassinet beside me. He posted a series of increasingly unhinged tweets about gold diggers and false accusations and ungrateful women who did not appreciate everything their husbands did for them. The comments were brutal. Not toward him, toward me. Women I had never met calling me names, accusing me of trying to steal a good man's money, suggesting that I had probably cheated on him and the baby was not even his. I turned off my phone and focused on what mattered. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for the following week. Judge Patricia Sullivan, known for fairness, appointed by a lottery system that even Thornton money could not corrupt. On the day of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with Denise on one side and Lily in my arms. Marcus was not there. Still in Paris, his lawyers claimed, unable to travel on such short notice. The judge was not sympathetic. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Judge Sullivan said, reviewing the documents in front of her. Mr. Thornton left his 8 months pregnant wife alone during a hurricane warning, traveled to Paris for Fashion Week, and is now unable to return for a custody hearing regarding his newborn daughter. "That is correct, Your Honor," Marcus's lawyer said smoothly. My client was assured by household staff that Mrs. Thornton would be well cared for. He had no idea the situation was dangerous. "The staff evacuated on Weather Service orders," I said quietly. "Everyone except 2 employees who stayed behind by choice. I gave birth on the living room floor during the eye of the storm." Judge Sullivan looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at Lily, small and peaceful in my arms, wearing a onesie that said "Daddy's Girl" in ironic pink letters. "Temporary custody is granted to the mother," she said. "Mr. Thornton may petition for visitation once he returns to the country and submits to a psychological evaluation. This court does not look kindly on fathers who abandon their families during natural disasters." I had won the first battle. Walking out of the courthouse, Denise grabbed my arm and squeezed. "That was incredible. You were so calm in there." I did not feel calm. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at a very long fall. But I had Lily, and I had the evidence, and for the first time in 2 years, I had hope. That hope lasted exactly 72 hours. Marcus came home on a Tuesday, but not to fight for custody. He came home to destroy me. I was in the safe house apartment, feeding Lily her afternoon bottle, when Rosa burst through the door with her phone held out like a weapon. "Turn on Channel 7, she said, "now." I fumbled for the remote and found the local news. Marcus was standing at a podium in front of the Thornton Capitol offices, surrounded by reporters and flanked by his mother and sister. He was wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, and his expression was one of wounded dignity. "I am here today to address the vicious lies being spread about me and my family," he said into the microphone. "My wife Emma is a deeply troubled woman. During her pregnancy, she became increasingly unstable, making threats against herself and our unborn child. The bottle slipped from my hands. Lily started to cry. I left for Paris because she told me to leave," Marcus continued. "She said she needed space. I had no idea the hurricane would be so severe, and when I tried to send help, she refused it. She accused rescue services of working for my family and would not let them in the house. That was a lie. No one had come. No one had even tried. Now she has kidnapped our newborn daughter and is hiding somewhere in the city," Marcus said, his voice breaking convincingly. "She has mental health issues going back years. I have documentation, medical records. I am begging anyone who knows where she is to please contact the authorities. My daughter's life may be in danger." The screen cut to a photo of me, one from our wedding that made me look slightly unhinged, my eyes too wide, my smile too frozen. The caption underneath read, "Have you seen this woman?" My phone exploded with notifications, text messages from numbers I did not recognize, voicemails from reporters, social media tags that I was afraid to look at. Denise called first. "Do not panic," she said, though her voice was tight. "This is a play. He is trying to get ahead of the fraud evidence by making you look crazy." "It is working," I said. "Everyone is going to believe him." "Not everyone. We have the truth on our side. But the truth does not matter when you are fighting someone with unlimited money and no conscience." I had learned that lesson in my marriage. I was about to learn it again in ways I never imagined. The next morning, Denise called with news that made my blood freeze. "The judge assigned to the permanent custody case is William Hartley," she said quietly. "He plays golf with Victoria Thornton every Sunday. Has for 15 years. Can we get him removed?" "We can try. But Emma, there is more. They are filing a motion to have you declared mentally unfit. They want Lily placed with Victoria while you undergo psychiatric evaluation." I could not breathe. The walls of the tiny apartment were closing in on me, the same suffocating feeling I had experienced in the Thornton mansion. Only now it was worse, because now I had something to lose. "They are going to take my daughter," I whispered. "They are going to win because they have more money and more lawyers and more connections than I could ever fight." "Then we do not fight in their arena," Rosa said from across the room. She had been listening, her arms crossed, her expression fierce. "We take this to a court they cannot control." "What do you mean?" "The court of public opinion." Her eyes met mine. "They want to make you look crazy. We make them look criminal. And we do it where everyone can see." The plan came together over 3 sleepless nights in that cramped apartment, fueled by cold coffee, leftover pizza, and the kind of desperate determination that only comes when you have absolutely nothing left to lose. Lily slept in her bassinet beside me, blissfully unaware that her mother was plotting the destruction of one of the most powerful families in Florida. Every few hours, I would stop working to feed her, change her, hold her against my chest and breathe in her baby smell. She was my anchor, my reminder of why I was fighting. We could not release the fraud evidence directly. I had learned that lesson the hard way in my years as a forensic accountant. Evidence obtained outside proper channels could be challenged, suppressed, thrown out entirely. Marcus's lawyers would claim everything was tainted, and a sympathetic judge might agree. We needed someone else to find the story, someone with credibility and resources, someone the public would believe. Denise knew a reporter at the Miami Herald named Sarah Bennett. She was an investigative journalist who had won 2 regional awards for her work exposing corporate corruption. More importantly, she had been trying to write about the Thorntons for years, but could never get enough evidence past the paper's legal team. "I am giving you a roadmap," I told Sarah when we met in a coffee shop on the wrong side of town. "I am not giving you documents or recordings or anything that could be challenged in court. I am telling you where to look and what questions to ask. If you find what I think you will find, the story will write itself." Sarah studied me across the table, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Why should I believe you?" "Marcus Thornton is saying you are mentally unstable, that you forged your own marriage certificate, that you kidnapped your daughter." I held her gaze without flinching. "Because I am a forensic accountant. I spent 5 years at Deloitte uncovering financial fraud. I know how to follow money, and I know what I found in my husband's files. 47 shell companies, 12 defrauded investors, 3 deliberately bankrupted businesses, $230 million hidden in offshore accounts." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "That is very specific. I am a very specific person." I pulled out a piece of paper and slid it across the table. "These are names of families the Thorntons destroyed. Business owners who trusted them and lost everything. Call them. Ask them what happened. Then decide if I am crazy or if I am telling the truth." She looked at the list for a long moment. Then she looked back at me. "If this is real, it is the biggest financial fraud case in Florida history." "It is real," I said, "and I am not the only victim. I am just the one they were stupid enough to marry." The second part of our plan was finding those other victims and convincing them to go public. Rosa's files contained names and dates going back more than a decade, a trail of destruction that the Thorntons had left in their wake without ever looking back. I started making calls from burner phones, never using the same one twice, never staying on the line long enough to be traced. Most people hung up the moment they heard the Thornton name. Fear has a long memory, and these families had learned the hard way what happened to people who challenged the powerful. But some listened, and some of them were angry enough to fight back. Margaret Collins was 68 years old, living in a retirement community in Boca Raton. She had owned a chain of dry cleaning stores for 30 years, built from nothing by her parents who had immigrated from Ireland with $12 in their pockets. The Thorntons had approached her with an offer to help her expand, then stripped her company for assets and left her with nothing but debt. "I lost my business," she told me, her voice shaking with old rage. "I lost my savings. I almost lost my house. My husband died 2 years later from the stress. The doctor said it was a heart attack, but I know better. They killed him just as surely as if they had put a gun to his head." "I am so sorry," I said. "I know that does not help, but I am trying to make sure they pay for what they did. To you and to everyone else." There was a long pause on the line. Then Margaret spoke again, her voice stronger now. "I have been waiting 15 years for someone brave enough to fight back. Tell me what you need." David Williams was 45, the son of a man who had built a construction company from the ground up. His father had trusted the Thorntons with expansion financing and watched everything he had worked for get dismantled piece by piece. The elder Williams had a stroke 6 months after losing the company and never fully recovered. "My father spent his last years in a nursing home," David told me. "Could not speak, could not feed himself. All because some rich family decided his life's work was worth more broken apart than whole." The Crawford family had run a restaurant empire across South Florida, 15 locations that served the best barbecue in 3 counties. The Thorntons had bought them out with promises of taking the brand national, then closed every location and sold the real estate for a profit. One by one I found them, the broken, the angry, the people who had been waiting in silence for someone to finally stand up. "We are not alone anymore," I told each of them. "And together, we are going to make sure the whole world knows what the Thorntons really are." While I built our coalition of survivors, Rosa worked her own contacts. 20 years as the Thornton housekeeper had given her access to information that most people would never see. She knew which employees had been mistreated, which contractors had been cheated, which secrets were buried in which closets. She found a former accountant who had been fired for asking too many questions about offshore transfers, a security guard who had witnessed Marcus shredding documents the night before an SEC inquiry, a maid who had overheard Victoria discussing how to hide assets from tax authorities. Each person was a thread, and together we were weaving a net that the Thorntons would never escape. 3 weeks after Marcus's press conference, Sarah Bennett's article dropped. Front page of the Miami Herald, above the fold, with a headline that made my heart sing with vicious satisfaction. "Thornton Capital, a decade of destruction." The article was devastating. 5 families profiled in intimate detail, their stories of trust and betrayal laid out for everyone to see. References to an ongoing SEC investigation. Quotes from anonymous sources inside the company confirming that fraud was not just possible but systematic. And buried near the end, almost as an afterthought, a single paragraph about the criminal investigation into Marcus Thornton's treatment of his pregnant wife. Public opinion did not just shift, it avalanched. The comments on every article about me transformed overnight. People who had called me a gold digger were now calling me a hero. The hashtag Justice for Emma started trending on social media. News crews that had been camped outside our hiding place, hoping for footage of the crazy kidnapper mom, quietly packed up and left. Denise called me with updates every few hours, her voice getting more excited with each call. The class action lawsuit has 17 plaintiffs now. No, wait, 32. Emma, 50 families have joined, 50 families who want to see the Thorntons burn. More importantly, the legal tide was turning. Judge Hartley, the golf buddy Victoria had counted on to rule in their favor, recused himself from my custody case after someone leaked photos of them together at a country club fundraiser. The new judge, Patricia Sullivan, had a reputation for fairness and zero tolerance for wealthy defendants who thought they could buy their way out of trouble. We were winning, actually genuinely winning. Marcus's lawyers approached with a settlement offer that made Denise's eyes go wide when she read it. Full custody for me, $10 million in cash, no criminal charges pursued against any member of the Thornton family. Everyone walks away and never speaks of this again. This is a good deal, Denise said carefully. A really good deal. You could take Lily and disappear. Start over somewhere they would never find you. $10 million buys a lot of anonymity. I looked at the document in her hands. $10 million to forget everything. To let the Thorntons walk away and continue destroying lives. To accept a payoff like all their other victims and fade quietly into the background. I thought about Margaret Collins, who lost her husband to stress and grief. About David Williams, whose father spent his final years unable to speak or feed himself. About all the families still out there who did not know yet that they were not alone. No, I said quietly, this is not about money. This was never about money. Denise stared at me. Emma, do you understand what you are turning down? I understand perfectly. I took the settlement papers from her hands and set them aside. I want justice. Real justice. I want Marcus in prison. I want Victoria exposed for what she really is. I want every single person they ever hurt to see the Thorntons brought low. I picked up Lily from her bassinet and held her close. And I want my daughter to grow up knowing that her mother did not take the easy way out. That when she had the chance to make a difference, she chose to fight. Denise was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, slow and fierce. All right then, let us go to war. I was about to tell her my ideas for the next phase when Rosa burst through the door, her face gray with shock. Turn on Channel 7, she said, right now. I grabbed the remote and found the local news. Victoria Thornton was standing at a podium, surrounded by reporters, looking every inch the grieving matriarch. But there was something triumphant in her eyes, something cruel hiding behind the performance of wounded dignity. We have discovered, Victoria said into the microphones, that Emma Lawson was never legally married to my son. The marriage certificate was forged. We have witnesses. We have documentation. Emma Lawson is not a scorned wife seeking justice. She is a con artist who preyed on our family, and we intend to see her prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The camera cut to a man standing beside her, a man I recognized, a man who had helped us escape the hurricane, who had given us shelter, who knew every detail of our plans. Rosa's cousin Danny, our ally, our friend, now their weapon. I felt the floor drop out from under me. Everything we had built, everything we had accomplished, all of it crumbling because someone I trusted had sold us out. Rosa made a sound like she had been punched in the stomach. That is Danny, my Danny. He helped us. He knows everything. I know, I whispered. That is the problem. The settlement offer was withdrawn within the hour. The SEC investigation was paused pending review of the evidence chain. The class action lawsuit was delayed indefinitely. The new judge needed to determine if my marriage was even valid before any custody decisions could be made. And if the marriage was ruled fraudulent, I would have no legal standing as Marcus's wife. No community property claims. No spousal protections. Lily could be taken from me and placed in state custody while everything got sorted out. I could lose my daughter because of a lie that my own allies had been paid to tell. I held my baby girl close and felt the last of my hope crumble to dust. The darkness that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I had survived hard things before. My mother's death, raising my brother alone. A marriage that systematically erased everything I was. But this was different. This was watching everything I had built get torn apart while I stood helpless to stop it. The days blurred together in the cramped apartment. I fed Lily, changed her, held her while she slept, and in between, I stared at walls and tried to remember how to breathe. Rosa went to confront Danny. She needed to understand why. Needed to look her own cousin in the face and hear him explain how he could betray his family for money. She came back hours later with red eyes and a broken expression that aged her 10 years. $50,000, she said quietly. That is what they paid him. $50,000 to destroy everything we built, to call his own cousin a liar, to help the people who hurt us escape justice. I tried to feel angry, but I was too exhausted for rage. Why? Rosa sat down heavily on the couch beside me. He has gambling debts. Bad ones. The kind of debts where people come to your house and break your kneecaps if you don't pay. The Thorntons found out and made him an offer he could not refuse. So he chose himself over us. He chose survival. Rosa's voice was bitter. I understand the impulse, even if I cannot forgive the choice. When you are desperate enough, you will do terrible things. I thought about that, about desperation, about the lengths people would go to when they felt trapped. I had been desperate too, Tifao. In the early days of my marriage, when I still believed that if I just tried harder, loved more completely, shrank myself small enough, Marcus would eventually see my worth. I had made choices I was not proud of, compromises that cost me pieces of myself. The difference was that my desperation had only hurt me. Danny's desperation had hurt everyone who trusted him. James stopped by that evening with takeout food I could not eat and updates I did not want to hear. The media coverage had shifted again. I was back to being the crazy woman, the con artist, the gold digger who had almost gotten away with it. The comments on social media were vicious. People I had never met wishing me dead, wishing my daughter taken away, celebrating the Thorntons as victims of my manipulation. I read them until my eyes burned, then kept reading. Some part of me felt like I deserved the punishment. Like maybe they were all right and I really was everything they said. James took the phone gently from my hands. You need to stop. Why? I stared at the ceiling. It does not matter anyway. We lost. They won. That is how these things always end. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that cut through my fog of despair. Do you know why I stayed during the hurricane? I turned to look at him. He was sitting in the chair across from me, his hands clasped between his knees, his expression thoughtful. I assumed it was because you could not leave, I said. The roads were flooded. I could have left before the storm hit. They offered to take me on the helicopter. Marcus said there was room for staff who wanted to evacuate to the mainland. He paused. I said no. I stayed because I saw you begging him not to leave, and I saw the way he looked at you. And I knew that if I got on that helicopter, you would be alone when something terrible happened. Why? I asked. You barely knew me because I have a daughter. James's voice was rough. She is 6 years old and she is my entire world. When I looked at you that day, 8 months pregnant, abandoned by everyone who should have loved you, I thought about what I would want someone to do if my daughter was ever in that situation. And I knew I could not live with myself if I walked away. Tears were streaming down my face now. I did not try to stop them. You saved my life, I whispered. No, he shook his head. You saved your own life. I just made sure you were not alone while you did it. And that is what I am trying to tell you now. You are not alone, Emma. You have Rosa. You have Denise. You have me. You have 50 families who believed in you enough to put their names on a lawsuit. You have a daughter who needs you to keep fighting. But they have all the power, I said. Every time we make progress, they tear it down. Every time we think we are winning, they find a new way to destroy us. Then we stop playing their game. James leaned forward, his eyes intense. We stop fighting on their terms. We find a different battlefield, one they do not control. I stared at him. What do you mean? You are a forensic accountant. You find things that people hide. So find the thing they are hiding right now. The marriage certificate is real. You know it. I know it. Everyone who was at your wedding knows it. If the Thorntons are claiming it was forged, then they must have manufactured evidence. Find the proof, expose the lie, and do it somewhere they cannot suppress the truth. I thought about that, about Danny's testimony, which hinged on a document that the Thorntons had produced, a document I had never seen before, a document that supposedly proved my marriage was fraudulent. Documents have fingerprints, I said slowly, metadata, paper composition, ink analysis. If they manufactured that certificate recently, there will be evidence. James nodded. And if you can prove they fabricated evidence in a federal case, that is not just fraud. That is obstruction of justice. That is a crime that even Thornton money cannot buy their way out of. For the first time in days, something flickered in my chest. Not hope exactly, but the absence of complete despair. I am my father's daughter, I said quietly, and my father never stopped fighting, no matter how powerful his enemies were. James smiled. Then let us show these people what that means. But before I could begin to plan our counterattack, I needed to do something else first. Something that felt more urgent than any legal strategy. The darkness in my mind had gotten worse over the past few days. The intrusive thoughts, the whispers that said everyone would be better off without me. I recognized them for what they were, symptoms of a mind and body pushed past their limits. But recognition was not the same as control. When your mind whispers that everyone would be better off without you, that whisper is a liar. It is exhaustion wearing a mask. It is despair pretending to be wisdom, and you do not fight it alone. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I had memorized years ago, back when I was 16 and grieving and convinced that the world would be better without me in it. National Crisis Hotline, a woman's voice said. This is Sandra. How can I help you tonight? I am not going to hurt myself, I said quickly. I need you to know that. But I am having thoughts that scare me, and I do not want to be alone with them right now. I understand, Sandra said. Her voice was warm, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. Tell me what is going on. I talked for an hour about the hurricane and the abandonment and the lies, about the betrayal and the legal battles and the feeling that no matter how hard I fought, I would always lose, about the beautiful baby girl sleeping in the next room who deserved a mother strong enough to keep going. Sandra listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finally ran out of words, she spoke. You are carrying so much right now, more than most people could handle. And you called. You reached out instead of staying silent. That takes courage. It does not feel courageous, I admitted. It feels like weakness. Asking him for help is the opposite of weakness. It is the bravest thing a person can do. She paused. You said you have people who care about you. A friend named Rosa, a lawyer named Denise, a man named James who stayed with you during a hurricane. Let them help you carry this weight. What if I let them down? What if you do not? Sandra's voice was gentle. What if you let them support you through this darkness and you come out the other side and you show your daughter what it looks like to survive? I was crying again, but these were different tears. Cleaner somehow, like something toxic was being washed away. Thank you, I said. I do not know why that helped so much, but it did. That is what we are here for, Sandra said. And Emma, you are not alone. You never were. After I hung up, I stood in the doorway of Lily's room and watched her sleep. Her tiny chest rose and fell. With each breath, her little fist was curled against her cheek. She was so small, so fragile, so completely dependent on me to protect her. I made a promise to her then. Silent, unbreakable. I would survive this. I would fight through the darkness and the despair and the impossible odds. I would show her what it looked like to stand back up after being knocked down. And I would make sure that the people who tried to destroy us paid for every single thing they had done. When someone accuses you of their own crime, do not just defend yourself. Investigate them. I had learned that lesson in my first year at Deloitte, uncovering fraud for clients who were always shocked to discover that the person pointing fingers was usually the one with dirty hands. Projection is the liar's favorite weapon. They accuse others of what they themselves have done, hoping to distract from their own guilt. The Thorntons were accusing me of forging my marriage certificate, which meant they had almost certainly forged it themselves. I went back to work with renewed purpose. Denise filed motions demanding independent verification of the document the Thorntons had produced. The judge granted them, appointing a neutral forensic document examiner to analyze the paper, the ink, the printing method, everything. The results came back in 5 days. The paper was manufactured in 2024, Denise read from the report, her voice trembling with barely contained excitement. The printer model was not released until 18 months after your wedding, and the ink contains a chemical compound that was not commercially available until last year. Their evidence was fake, not just questionable or ambiguous, demonstrably, provably fake. The Thorntons had manufactured a fraudulent document and presented it in federal court. That was not just civil fraud. That was criminal obstruction of justice. We have them, Denise said, grinning like a wolf who had finally cornered her prey. We actually have them. But proving the Thorntons were liars was only half the battle. I needed something more. Something that would destroy their credibility so completely that no amount of money or connections could rebuild it. The answer came from the last person I expected. James had been making calls to old contacts from his military days, people who had gone into law enforcement or private investigation after leaving the service. One of them knew someone who had been following the Thornton case with personal interest. Her name was Vanessa Moore. She was 23 years old, blonde, beautiful, and 7 months pregnant with Marcus's baby. She had watched the news coverage of our case with growing horror. Marcus had told her I was his ex-wife, that our marriage had been over for years, that the pregnancy I was flaunting was probably not even his. He had painted me as a crazy stalker who could not accept that he had moved on. Then she saw Victoria's press conference, heard them claim that Marcus had never been legally married at all, and realized that if my marriage was fraudulent, then every promise Marcus had made to her was a lie too. When she confronted him, he did not apologize. He did not explain. He threatened her, "Get rid of it and disappear," he had snarled, according to Vanessa, "or you will end up like Emma." She came to me because she had nowhere else to go. Her family had disowned her when they learned she was pregnant by a married man. Her friends had abandoned her. She was alone, scared, and carrying the child of a monster who wanted both of us dead. I should have hated her. This woman who had slept with my husband, who had believed his lies, who had been planning to build a life on the wreckage of mine. But when I looked at Vanessa across the table in our safe house, all I saw was another victim. Another woman who had been manipulated by a man who saw people as objects to be used and discarded. "He did the same thing to both of us," I said quietly. "Made us feel special, then made us feel small. I did not know you existed." Vanessa was crying, her makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "He said you were crazy. He said you had made up the pregnancy to trap him. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because I thought he loved me. I know, that is how he operates. He finds women who are vulnerable, who want to be loved, and he tells them exactly what they need to hear. It is not your fault." She stared at me like I had spoken in a foreign language. "You do not hate me. I did it first." I thought about all the nights I had spent crying while Marcus was with her, all the times he made me feel worthless while he was making her feel special. But then I realized something. You did not betray me. He did. He lied to both of us. He used both of us. And now he is trying to destroy both of us. I reached across the table and took her hand. "We are not enemies, Vanessa. We are survivors of the same war. And if we work together, we can end it." Vanessa had evidence. Months of text messages where Marcus promised to leave me, to marry her, to build a future together. Voicemails where he talked about getting rid of the Emma problem. And one recording that would change everything. A week before the hurricane, Marcus had gotten drunk at a party in Paris. Vanessa had recorded him on her phone, thinking it was funny at the time, wanting to tease him later about how sloppy he got when he drank. In the video, slurring his words and laughing, Marcus bragged about how clever he had been, how the insurance policy was foolproof, how the hurricane was perfect timing, how his mother had friends in the prosecutor's office who would make sure nothing ever stuck. He did not know he was being recorded. He did not know his own arrogance would be his undoing. "We have him," I said, watching the video for the third time. "We have him admitting to attempted murder." "What do we do with it?" Vanessa asked. "We do not leak it. We do not post it online. We do not give his lawyers any way to claim it was manipulated or taken out of context." I smiled grimly. "We save it for the courtroom. We let him sit there in his expensive suit, confident that his money will protect him, and then we play his own words for the judge and the jury and the whole world to hear." Denise had been watching our conversation from across the room. Now she spoke up. "I have to say, when you told me you were meeting with the mistress, I thought you had finally lost your mind." She shook her head slowly, a smile spreading across her face. "But this might actually be the most brilliant and legal strategy I have ever seen." Rosa came in from the kitchen with tea and sandwiches. She had been listening too. "It is biblical," she declared. "The women unite against the oppressor, just like Ruth and Naomi." Denise raised an eyebrow. "I do not think that is what that story is about. It should be." Rosa set down the tray with a decisive thump. "Now eat something, all of you. We have a war to win, and soldiers need their strength." Over the next 2 weeks, we prepared for battle. Denise filed motions to have Danny's testimony thrown out, citing the proof that the document he was supporting had been fabricated. She submitted the forensic analysis as evidence, along with depositions from paper manufacturers and ink chemists confirming that the marriage certificate the Thorntons produced could not possibly be genuine. I used my forensic accounting skills to trace every dollar the Thorntons had hidden, every shell company, every offshore account, every wire transfer to foreign banks in countries with no extradition treaties. The picture that emerged was damning, a decade of systematic fraud that made their treatment of me look almost innocent by comparison. And Vanessa prepared her testimony, rehearsing her story with Denise until every detail was perfect. She was scared. She had every reason to be, but she was also angry, and anger made her brave. The night before the final hearing, I stood on the balcony of our hiding place and looked out at the Miami skyline. Lily was asleep in my bed. Rosa was snoring on the couch. Denise had gone back to her hotel to prepare. James found me there, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Nervous?" he asked, handing me one, terrified. I took a sip, letting the warmth steady me. What if it does not work? What if they buy their way out again? What if I lose Lily? What if you win? James leaned against the railing beside me. What if tomorrow is the day everything changes? What if you walk out of that courthouse free? I do not know how to imagine that, I admitted. I have been fighting so long. I do not know who I am if I am not fighting. Maybe you get to find out. He turned to look at me, his eyes soft in the darkness. Maybe you get to discover who Emma Lawson is when she is not surviving, when she is just living. I thought about that, about a life without fear, without legal battles, without the constant weight of injustice pressing down on my shoulders. It sounded like a fairy tale, but maybe fairy tales could come true. Tomorrow, I said quietly. Tomorrow, James agreed. We stood there together in the darkness, watching the city lights sparkle, waiting for the dawn. The courtroom was packed to capacity. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters lined the walls, cameras banned but notebooks ready. People who had never met me, who had followed my story through news articles and social media posts, had shown up to witness the ending. I walked in with Denise on my right and Lily in my arms. My daughter was almost 4 months old now, bright-eyed and alert, wearing a white dress with tiny pink flowers. I wanted her there. I wanted the judge and the jury and Marcus himself to see the child he had tried to kill. Rosa sat in the front row of the gallery, her hands clasped in her lap. Beside her was Margaret Collins, who had flown in from Boca Raton to watch the man who destroyed her family face justice. David Williams was there too, and the Crawfords, and dozens of other faces I recognized from our coalition of survivors. The Thorntons entered from the other side of the courtroom. Marcus looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow, like the lies he had built his life on were finally catching up with him. He was wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a month, but it hung on him wrong, like he had lost weight from stress. Victoria sat directly behind him, dressed in tasteful black, clutching rosary beads in a performance of religious piety that I had never once witnessed in all my years of knowing her. Her face was arranged in an expression of martyred suffering, but her eyes were hard and calculating. Carolyn was crying before the proceedings even began. Whether from fear or guilt or simple anxiety, I could not tell. Maybe all three. Judge Patricia Sullivan called the court to order and asked the Thornton lawyer to present their case. He was good. I will give him that. He spoke for 45 minutes, painting a picture of me as a master manipulator, a con artist who had targeted Marcus for his wealth and nearly succeeded in destroying an upstanding family. He called witnesses who testified to my erratic behavior, my mood swings, my desperate attempts to hold on to a marriage that was falling apart. He did not mention the hurricane, did not mention the life insurance policy, did not mention the burner phone or the pregnant mistress or any of the evidence that might complicate his narrative. When he finally sat down, looking smug and satisfied, Judge Sullivan turned to our table. "Ms. Carter, your response." Denise stood slowly. She was calm, controlled, every inch the professional. "Your Honor," she began, "opposing counsel has presented a compelling story, but that is all it is. A story. A fiction designed to distract from the truth. And the truth is that Marcus Thornton and his family are criminals who have spent the past decade destroying lives and are now desperately trying to avoid consequences." She presented our evidence methodically, building the case piece by piece like a master architect constructing a building. First came the forensic analysis of the marriage certificate. Expert witnesses testified that the paper was manufactured in 2024, that the ink contained compounds not commercially available until last year, that the document could not possibly be genuine. The Thorntons produced this certificate as evidence that my client forged her marriage, Denise said. But the only forgery here was committed by them. They manufactured a fraudulent document and presented it in federal court. That is not just fraud, that is obstruction of justice. Marcus's lawyer objected, tried to claim the analysis was flawed, but Judge Sullivan shut him down with a look that could have frozen the Miami sun. Next came Danny's recanted testimony. Rose's cousin had broken down 3 days earlier, unable to live with the guilt of what he had done. He had signed an affidavit admitting that the Thorntons had paid him $50,000 to lie, that the marriage certificate was real, that everything he had said at Victoria's press conference was scripted by their lawyers. The witness was coerced, Denise said flatly, bribed, manipulated by a family that believes money can buy anything, including truth. Then came the financial evidence. I took the stand myself to present it, walking the court through the maze of shell companies and offshore accounts, the systematic fraud that had destroyed 50 families. I spoke for 2 hours using charts and graphs and documents to paint a picture of corruption so vast it was almost incomprehensible. When I finished, I looked directly at Marcus. You stole $230 million from people who trusted you, I said. You bankrupted businesses. You destroyed families. You caused deaths from the stress and the heartbreak. And you did it all while smiling and shaking hands and pretending to be a pillar of the community. His lawyer tried to interrupt, but I kept going. You married me because you thought I was stupid, because you saw a girl from Ohio and assumed she would be easy to control. You took away my career and my friends and my self-respect, and when I got pregnant, you decided I was more valuable dead than alive. Emma, Marcus started, his voice cracking. I am not finished. My words cut through him like knives. You abandoned me in a hurricane. You took out a life insurance policy on me a month before. You left with your mother and your sister and your pregnant mistress. And you posted pictures on social media while I was giving birth on the floor of your mansion. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Every eye was fixed on me. You wanted me to die. You planned for me to die. And when I survived, you tried to destroy me through the courts instead. You called me crazy. You claimed my marriage was fake. You turned your own family's lawyers into weapons and aimed them at a woman who had done nothing except love you. I stood up from the witness stand and walked toward him slowly. The bailiffs tensed, but did not stop me. But here is what you never understood, Marcus. I am from Toledo. My father fought factory owners who had more money and more power than he could ever imagine. My mother worked double shifts until it killed her. I watched them both and I learned. I learned that you fight even when you cannot win. You stand up even when they knock you down. You keep going even when everything seems hopeless. I stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. I was never the soft, scared woman you thought you married. I was just tired. I was just beaten down. But I am awake now, and I am not afraid of you anymore. Then came Vanessa. She walked into the courtroom with her belly swollen and her head held high, and I watched Marcus's face drain of color. He had not known she would be here, had not known she had turned against him. Vanessa told her story simply and without embellishment, how Marcus had pursued her, seduced her, promised her a future, how he had lied about me, claimed we were divorced, painted me as a psychotic ex who refused to accept reality, how she had believed him because she wanted to believe him, because she was young and lonely and desperate to be loved. And then she played the recording. Marcus's own voice filled the courtroom, slurred and arrogant. He bragged about the insurance policy, about the hurricane timing, about his mother's connections in the prosecutor's office. He laughed about how easy it had all been, how stupid I was, how he would be free to start over once the storm did what he could not. When the recording ended, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Victoria broke first. She launched herself to her feet, screaming at Vanessa, calling her name so vile that the bailiffs had to physically restrain her. Her carefully constructed mask of dignity shattered completely, revealing the vicious, hateful woman underneath. "You stupid little whore," she shrieked as they dragged her toward the exit. "You ruined everything, everything." Caroline collapsed in sobs, 20 years of complicity crashing down around her. She had known. They had all known. And now the whole world knew too. Marcus did not scream or cry. He just sat there, frozen, as FBI agents moved toward him with handcuffs ready. His lawyer was talking frantically about appeals and due process, but no one was listening. Judge Sullivan's voice cut through the chaos. "Order! I will have order in this court." The room slowly quieted. Victoria was removed. Caroline was helped to a seat. The FBI agents waited at the edge of the proceedings, patient as predators. Judge Sullivan looked at me for a long moment. Then she spoke. "In 23 years on the bench, I have seen many terrible things. But this case represents a level of cruelty and corruption that I find genuinely shocking. Mr. Thornton did not just abandon his pregnant wife. He actively conspired to cause her death. He manufactured evidence. He bribed witnesses. He attempted to use this court as a weapon against his victim." She turned to Marcus. "You are a predator, Mr. Thornton. A predator who hid behind wealth and privilege and family connections. You destroyed lives without remorse. You would have destroyed many more if not for the courage of your wife and the other survivors who refused to stay silent." Her gavel came down like a thunderclap. Full custody of the minor child Lily is awarded to the mother. The marriage is ruled valid. All community assets are to be divided according to Florida law. And Mr. Thornton is remanded to federal custody pending trial on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits, desperate to file their stories. The survivors in the gallery cheered and embraced. Somewhere behind me, Rosa was crying, but I did not move. I stood in the center of the chaos, holding my daughter, watching them put handcuffs on the man who had tried to kill us both. Marcus looked at me one last time as they led him away. His eyes were pleading, desperate. "Emma," he said, "please, I loved you." I shook my head slowly. "No, you did not know how." And then he was gone, and it was over, and I was free. Denise appeared at my side, grinning so wide it looked painful. "We did it. We actually did it." I know. I felt strange, hollow, like I had been bracing for a blow that never came. "I do not know what to do now." "Now," Denise laughed. "Now you live. That is what you do. You raise that beautiful girl, and you build a life that is yours, and you never let anyone make you feel small again." James found me in the hallway outside the courtroom. He had been watching Lily during the proceedings, and she was sleeping peacefully in his arms, unaware that her future had just been secured. "You were incredible in there," he said quietly. I was terrified. That is what courage is, being terrified and doing it anyway. I looked at him, at this man who had stayed with me through the storm, literally and figuratively, who had seen me at my worst and never turned away. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "Always," he replied. And somehow I knew he meant it 1 year later. The apartment in Chicago was small but warm. It was filled with books and soft light and the sounds of my daughter learning to navigate her world. No marble floors here, no Italian tiles or designer furniture or art that cost more than most people made in their entire lives. Just home, real home. The first one I had ever truly had. Lily took her first steps on a Tuesday morning in October. She wobbled across the living room like a tiny drunk, her face scrunched in concentration, her arms windmilling for balance. When she finally collapsed into my arms, she looked up at me with a grin so triumphant that I burst out laughing. "Look at you," I said, kissing her chubby cheeks. "Look at my brave, brilliant girl." She babbled something that sounded like mama, and my heart cracked open the way it did 100 times a day with her. The love was overwhelming sometimes, so big it barely fit inside my chest. After the trial, I moved back to the Midwest where I belonged. I traded the gilded prison of Miami for the genuine warmth of a city that did not care about my last name, or my social standing, or how much money I had in the bank. I went back to school for a master's degree in nonprofit management. I built something meaningful with the skills I had spent years suppressing. The Emma Lawson Foundation helped victims of financial fraud navigate the legal system, providing forensic accounting services for free to families who could not afford to fight back against wealthy predators. In our first year, we helped 53 families recover more than $12 million. We got criminal charges filed against 11 individuals. We sent 2 people to prison and forced 6 more to pay restitution. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. Rosa ran our outreach programs from a community center in Miami. Her daughter Sarah worked beside her. The bakery dream replaced by something even better. A mission that helped other people avoid the pain they had experienced. Denise left her corporate law firm to serve as our general counsel. She made half the money and worked twice the hours and told me regularly that she had never been happier in her entire life. We have helped more people in 1 year than I helped in 10 years of corporate practice, she said one evening over wine and takeout. This is what I was supposed to be doing all along. It just took your disaster to show me. I threw a fortune cookie at her head. She caught it and ate it anyway. The Thorntons were scattered now, their empire demolished, their name synonymous with corruption and cruelty. Marcus was serving 15 years in federal prison. I heard through the grapevine that he had aged badly, that his hair had gone gray and his posture had crumbled. He had tried to contact me twice, letters that I returned unopened. I had nothing left to say to him, and I would not give him the satisfaction of knowing he still occupied any space in my thoughts. Victoria got 8 years, plus permanent exile from the society she had spent her whole life climbing into. The women who had once competed for invitations to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. The charities she had chaired removed her name from their buildings. She was a pariah, and she would die a pariah, and that was a kind of justice that felt almost as satisfying as the prison sentence. Carolyn received a suspended sentence in exchange for testimony against her family. She was attending therapy now, working through the guilt and complicity that had defined her entire adult life. She sent me handwritten letters sometimes, apologies that I kept but did not read. Maybe someday I would forgive her, maybe not. That was my choice to make. Vanessa had her baby 2 months after the trial. A boy she named Michael, after her grandfather who had always believed in her, even when no one else did. She was living in Oregon now, starting over with the settlement money I had insisted she receive as another victim of Marcus's manipulation. We texted sometimes, not quite friends, but something like fellow survivors of the same war. She sent me pictures of Michael. I sent her pictures of Lily. Our children would never know their father, and that was a gift we had given them both. James finished law school 6 months after the trial. He specialized in legal aid now, helping people who could not afford attorneys navigate systems designed to crush them. We had dinner together every Thursday, and sometimes our daughters played together while we talked about cases and laughed about life. There was something between us. There had been since the hurricane. A spark, a connection, a possibility that neither of us had acted on yet. We were both too careful, too scarred by the past, too focused on building lives that were truly our own. But I was starting to think that maybe careful could coexist with courage. That maybe scars did not have to mean closed hearts. That maybe 2 people who had learned how hard love could be were exactly the right people to try again. No rush, no pressure, just 2 humans learning to trust again, one small step at a time. On the anniversary of the hurricane, I sat on my small balcony and watched the sunset over the Chicago skyline. Lily was asleep inside, her breathing soft through the baby monitor. The city lights were just beginning to sparkle, beautiful without being cold. My phone buzzed. A producer from 60 Minutes wanted to interview me for a story about financial fraud and survivor advocacy. Apparently, I had become something of a symbol, a representation of what was possible when ordinary people refused to stay silent. I considered the request. The old Emma would have said no, would have hidden, would have been afraid of the spotlight and the scrutiny and the judgment, but I was not the old Emma anymore. I typed back, yes, I will do it. People asked me sometimes if I regretted marrying Marcus, if I wished I had seen the signs earlier, if I would go back and change things if I had the chance. The answer was always complicated. I could not regret anything that gave me Lily, could not wish away the path that led me to her, no matter how painful the journey had been. My daughter was the best thing in my life, and she would not exist if I had made different choices. But I could learn from the pain. I could teach Lily and anyone else who would listen the lessons I had paid so dearly to understand. Love is not supposed to require you to shrink. It is supposed to help you grow. If someone says they love you but makes you feel smaller, that is not love. That is control wearing a mask. Power imbalances are never just the way things are. They are choices that powerful people make, sustained by the silence of everyone else. Breaking that silence is not just your right, it is your responsibility. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Do not make excuses. Do not tell yourself it will get better. Do not shrink yourself to fit into their limitations. See clearly, act decisively, trust yourself. And when life knocks you down, when the world seems determined to keep you there, when every voice around you says that fighting back is impossible and you should just accept your fate, get up anyway, fight anyway, survive anyway. Because impossible is just another word for hard. And hard things are worth doing. Hard things are the only things that change us. I walked inside and checked on Lily one more time. She was sprawled in her crib like a starfish, one tiny fist curled against her cheek, breathing the deep, peaceful breaths of someone who had never known fear. She would grow up watching her mother stand tall, work hard, love fiercely, ask for help when she needed it, refuse to settle for anything less than she deserved. She would know that her worth was not determined by anyone else's opinion, that her voice mattered, that she was enough exactly as she was. That was my legacy now, not the trial or the foundation or the media attention. My legacy was this little girl who would grow up free. The apartment was quiet. The city hummed outside. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear music playing, someone's radio drifting through an open window. I thought about the woman I had been 2 years ago, broken, afraid, convinced that I deserved whatever crumbs of affection Marcus occasionally threw my way. That woman felt like a stranger now, a ghost from another life. The hurricane had destroyed everything I thought I knew. My marriage, my identity, my understanding of love and safety and trust. But from the wreckage, I had built something new, something stronger, something real. I was Emma Lawson, survivor, mother, fighter, founder, friend, a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not unburned but unbroken. And I was just getting started. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening psalm. Inside, my daughter dreamed. And I stood in the doorway between them, no longer afraid of storms. I had survived the worst one already. I was still standing. And tomorrow I would wake up and keep fighting, keep building, keep loving, keep living. That was more than enough. That was everything. And that is my story. The story of how I stopped being a victim and became a survivor. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, I have one small favor to ask. Hit that like button, not for me, but for every woman out there who is still trapped in her own hurricane, still waiting for permission to fight back. Your like tells the algorithm to share this story with someone who might need to hear it tonight. Drop a comment below. Tell me what part hit you the hardest. Tell me your own story if you are comfortable. This community is built on women lifting each other up, and your voice matters here. And if you have not already, subscribe and turn on notifications. We post stories like this every week. Stories about ordinary women who did extraordinary things. Stories about survival and strength and never giving up. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for being part of this journey. And remember, you are stronger than you know. You are braver than you feel. And your story is not over yet. See you in the next one.